We helped a creative agency owner scale from $1.2 million to $1.9 million a year by working less hours. We took her from 70 hours to 30 hours a week. And the best part is she took home almost $900,000 in profit. And all we did was identify and then solve the three biggest bottlenecks in her business. Hi, my name is Kajana. Most people call me Cage, and I am the leader, owner, CEO, managing member, technically is the actual word, of Powered by Aloha, and we are a RevOps automation agency. What does that mean? We identify the revenue operation components of a business, and we fix the bottlenecks so that the CEO slash operator can scale their business tomorrow. Like literally, like when they decide like it's time to scale, they can just start scaling the business. And that's what we do. Now, with this very interesting example, I think you're going to enjoy. We took a creative agency owner who, was getting lots of work. Like at the time that she came to us, she was getting so much work, she was completely overwhelmed. In our discovery call, we hop on and I'm like, tell me about the business. She's like, it's great. I have 6 people in my inbox right now who are following up with me for the second or third time to get a proposal. And I'm like, oh, that's great. You're like killing it right now. She's like, I am getting all of these leads. She had a very strong referral network. And because she did creative for very regulated industries, lawyers, RIAs, CPAs, so on and so forth. Because she was doing good work, she was getting highly referred around the different industries because of what she did, and she had an emphasis on the knowing the compliance things required for that industry. So she's like, yeah, I have all these people, all these leads coming in who are like really want to work with me, but I'm completely slammed, and there's absolutely no way that I can take on any more clients. So I'm like, okay, so it sounds like we need to figure out what your bottleneck is. Boom, timing, hotkeys for the win. So bring it up. So I'm like, okay, so walk me through your business and tell me what's happening. So she comes to me, she's a creative agency, right? And at the time she was doing the $1.2 million a year. And so her issue, she said, is that, I have all of this work coming in, but I personally spend too much time reviewing creative. And I'm like, okay, I'm like, tell me about that. Tell me about reviewing creative. And she says, so I have a project manager who oversees the operations, right, and making sure things come back. But I'm the person who reviews every piece of creative per client that comes in. So I'm like, okay, that makes sense. Tell me more about that. She's like, well, I send out the work, or rather I put together the strategy. We have the client film everything. We have the client put together the materials. Then we send it out to our editors, and the editors will go and do their editing and they'll bring it back. And I'm like, okay. And she says the problem is, on average, when she would get back materials for review per client, she was reviewing 68 minutes of creative control. Now, to put that into perspective, when you are running a agency, right, where you have to quality control every piece of every asset that comes out before it goes to the client or even goes for scheduling, is you have to make sure that it stays within compliance and that it is accurate to whatever strategy or uniqueness that client brings. So after her editor would create the content, she would have to spend 68 minutes reviewing that. That's a lot. That's a long time. If you imagine, let's just make super easy math right now. Imagine she has to review 10 clients a week. 68 times 10 is 680. That's like 11 hours, 11 and a half hours almost of just reviewing creative. Now, that's not on top of everything else she's doing in the business. So 68 minutes. So that is a lot of time. That would help. So we do that. So I'm like, okay, that makes sense. Tell me more. So after that, she says, okay, so I review the creative and it comes back in, and we go through this process of doing the creative and sending it out. Now, in her model, every 2 to 3 months, someone would like the results so much that they would want to increase their scope with her in order to take it on. So 2 to 3 month scope increase. Now, the issue she would run into is when they would want to increase their scope. So the team, the project manager, already has a cadence of how they work the account and how they order creative out to the creatives who make everything, bring it back in. She does the quality control, and then it goes to the client. Now, what would happen is when they would do the scope increase, it took almost 14 days for the new scope to get integrated into how they were already doing things. Now, it doesn't seem like a lot, but if we think it from the perspective of a creative agency, when you are making creative, you are essentially, you have to do the strategy, you have to get the copy, you have to put together the copy, you have to send it back for review to make sure it's all good, you have to go and do the edit, the filming and the editing, do all the post-production, send it over, right? There's some variation of that flow. So imagine it took 14 days to get the project started. That means by the time it came out, we're almost a month into it before the client sees any difference. Now, mind you, the clients aren't really complaining from the perspective of they're so happy with the prior results. But if anyone knows anything about managing clients and managing expectations, the faster you can get the next round of deliverables out, the happier clients will be and the more ecstatic they'll be about the results. Plus, the question's always like, what am I paying for? Well, you're paying for this. So that was the next problem. So I said, okay, that makes sense to me. Finally, what else is going on? And she's like, well, the last thing we have here is I'm just slammed. Like, I'm personally spending all of this time doing all of this work. Like I said, she's doing 68 minutes because she's the founder, CEO. She's taking all the sales calls. She's the face of the marketing when they're doing referrals. So she's basically balancing all the revenue activities as well as all of the operational activities. Plus account executive and being the face that interacts with clients. So I'm like, okay, so if we think of all the things you have going on here, if you could remove yourself from one role, which would you want to remove? She's like, oh, I would want to stop being the account executive, right? The person who interacts with the client. So I'm like, okay, executive removal. I'm like, so she tells me this, and I'm like, maybe that's a real thing. And this is me talking internally to myself. I'm like, I don't think you actually want that. That's what seems the easiest or what you think would be most effective, but let's not get away from ourselves. Let's follow the process. So these are our facts. This is what we found in discovery. So let's go through them one by one. So let's go to a pen so I can draw. That is green. So first up we have, she's reviewing 68 minutes of creative. That's a lot. Again, imagine she has 10 clients she has to review in 1 week. That's 10 hours of just reviewing creative. So I asked her, and also that falls into the poor work category, potentially, right? So I asked her, man, I'm not getting any better at drawing with this mouse. This is crazy. So I asked her, okay, so when your creatives go to edit things, like walk me through the process. She's like, okay, so I give them the big idea of where they're going. I give them the concept of what has to be done. They take all the creative and they then edit it and they load it up into this platform called Whipster. They send it back to me and I go through and I add all my notes. So I said, okay, so when you're adding these notes, how often are they the same notes versus different notes? So she's like, so for this editor, or these two editors rather, a lot of the notes that I'm bringing back are the exact same notes. Brand color, brand font, location, who the target audience is, what edits make sense, what edits don't make sense, what compliance things have to be checked for, so on and so forth. So I said, okay, do you think that you could create a list of what all of those items are so that you are able to consistently have those be available? And she's like, what do you mean? So I said, one of the most common things that happen when you get back work that isn't good enough, poor work as we call it, is usually there's not something that the person who's doing the work can measure against to see if their work is good enough standard. We call it a good enough checklist because we are so clever. So I asked her, can you put together a checklist that for this one editor and the client that they're working on, can you put together a checklist that allows them to see that these criteria have to be met before they can upload the video and send it back to you? She said, sure, I can do that. So one is we did the good enough checklist. We call it a GEC because everyone loves shorthands and it's fun when you confuse people. So she takes this time, she goes and puts together GEC and she brings it back to me and I'm like, okay, sick. So now we have this. I want you to give this to this one editor, no one else, just this one editor. And I want you to see what work comes back and tell me how it goes. So she sends it off and, she gives it a week or two, comes back to me. She's like, Kajana, you won't believe it. For that one editor, I went from 68 minutes down to 9 minutes to review the exact same amount of creative prior to the good enough checklist, GEC. So I said, excellent. So the problem was that looking at your creator, they did not have anything to measure their work against. Like, did we make sure we use this font? Did we make sure we use this color? Did we make sure we use this cut style? Did we make sure for this industry we use this type of compliance or whatever? And as a result of that, the editor, whose primary job is to focus on the entire piece of production itself, missed all of these small little things that are not important from their perspective, but from the perspective of bringing it back to the client, it's extremely important. So we were able to reduce her time from 68 minutes to 9 minutes on that one creative. Over the next 3 weeks, I had her do the exact same process for every single client, for every single creative, and overall, we were able to bring her entire time down to an average of 10 to 12 minutes per client. So if we think of it just purely mathematically, if she went from 68 minutes, draw an arrow up here, down to, let's call it 15 minutes. Let's just be wild with it. We've essentially got her to do the exact same output for 1/4 of the time. So where she was taking 10 clients would be 10 hours. We got her to do 10 clients in 2.5 hours, bringing her back, giving her 7.5 hours back of her time every single week. And how do we do that? By standardizing what is good enough for her creatives whenever they would send things back. So they knew before they could send something back, it had to be good enough in this very simple little checklist, which, by the way, we actually have. This is her portal, literally. I should have blocked her name out. That's okay. I hope she doesn't mind. Should be fine. We have a good enough checklist here. It's a tool that we created that simply is you upload. You can bring a URL. You can upload a file directly, or you can link in a Google Doc or sheet. You have any additional sources you need. If there are 2 locations you pull from, how detailed should it be? What is the context? Basically like a voice note of like, hey, this is what this person is going to use it for, and then what it is, and you create that, and then you send it off, and then you have a checklist. Obviously, you have to QC it to make sure it meets your specific criteria, but this tool right here is able to make GECs. Like, typical person spends 3 hours making one if they make it by hand. Using this tool, we can get it down to 20 minutes, which is way better if you think about it from the perspective of, again, 20 minutes being 68 minutes per round to 15 minutes per round. Would you spend 20 minutes one time to potentially save yourself 45 minutes every single week? Yeah, the answer is definitely. And not even 45. That's 45 minutes per client, actually, now that I say that out loud. Yeah. Anyways, so that's what we did to eliminate her poor work problem. So next we have our 2 to 3 month scope increase, 14 days to onboarding. So we solved this problem. Like, great. Now, is this still your primary problem? And she's like, yeah, we are actually still having this continued issue. I'm like, awesome. Let's talk about that. So I asked her, okay, so it's currently taking 2 to 3 months, or rather every 2 to 3 months, your clients want to increase their scope because they're so happy with the work. Then you hop onto a call with them, walk me through what happens next. So she says, okay, so we hop onto the call, and on the call, we walk through the process. We walk through the new scope they want to add on. Might be more images, might be moving to a new video platform, like going from just TikTok or TikTok to Instagram, TikTok to YouTube, YouTube Shorts, so on and so forth. We moved into that's a pretty common scope for us. So then we have to gear up a new round of scope of work, right? What goes into it? Potentially we have to add some additional components at the beginning in order to, like, for example, TikTok creative isn't necessarily meant for YouTube, long form YouTube content. So we have to put together new scripts and or do more research and or whatever, so that we can then go into the implementation phase, which is the easy part. Just getting the scripts to them. They do their filming, they give it back to us. We do our editing, we distribute it. I'm like, okay, makes sense. So she said, it takes the 14 days right now to get that going. So I asked, what happens after that call is done? So she said, okay, what happens after the call is done is we take the transcript of that call. We take the transcript, we take the transcript, and we will then have one of our admins go through, listen to the transcript, and they will pull out all of the materials. So pull materials, pull mats, and then after they pull materials, they will go in and create a brand new spreadsheet. Now we have a template, but they're going to go through and create it themselves. And I'm like, okay, I should template. This is so bad. Template sheet. I'm like, okay, how long does that take? She's like, well, the transcript portion, right after the call, so we usually have them do it same day or the next morning. So this takes about 2 hours. And then taking the notes and then putting it into a template sheet, that can take up to 8 hours. And I'm like, holy Jesus, that's a long time. She's like, I don't know, it used to take us 12 hours before we had the template sheet. And I'm like, well, that's still really bad. Comparatively, it's better, but that's still really bad. So I said, okay, let's look at this process and break it down. So we're looking through it, and I asked myself, in this instance, is the problem that the work is poor, because this final thing happens here? Or is the issue that there's unnecessary friction because we have to go through this process? So I say, well, the actual problem is that we have unnecessary friction. So I look at it from that lens. Unnecessary friction is red. Unnecessary friction, specifically around this component here, and the fact that this takes 8 hours. That is crazy time. So I say, okay, how about we do this? What we're going to do is we are going to take this, we're going to first take the template that you have of your sheet, which you know is accurate. She's like, yep, template's accurate. It's 60% the same. All we're doing is adding or removing things. It has when things start, when things end. It has what role it should be assigned to, copywriter versus developer versus editor, so on and so forth. So all we do is go and plug in, change it around, and make adjustments. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense to me. So we take this, and I say, first we're going to take this template here, and what we're going to do is we're going to make 4 or 5 or 10 variations that are 80% accurate to that scope of work. So if you have one for YouTube, you're going to do this one. If you have one for Instagram, you're going to do this one. If you have one for blogs or whatever, we're going to have it be so it's 80% unique to that platform specifically. That's the first thing we're going to do, is we're going to standardize this template per scope of work. After we standardize it, what we're then going to do is we're going to build an automation that when the transcript comes in, we're going to completely cut this portion out. I should make that red, actually. Let's make that red. We're going to completely cut out the admin manually going through. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to take this transcript and we're going to run it through an automation that's going to pull out all of the after action items. What are all the things that have to get done? We're then going to take this after action item, we're going to run it into a second automation that's going to match it up against the templates that you want to have installed. And the reason we're doing this is if we can take the transcript, run it into the after action list with this automation that we built, it will capture every single thing that is said. It will also capture any assumptions that are being communicated as well, or that are not being said explicitly. After we do that, and we now have this after action checklist, as we call it, we then take this after action checklist and we're going to run it into another automation that, based upon the topic here, it's going to identify which template it should be going into. And then knowing that today, in this example, right now it's July 3rd. On July 3rd, it's going to use July 3rd as the starting date, and it's going to take the start date and then populate the rest of the template all the way across. So all of your dates, times, who's, what's are all already selected. This way, if we do that, then when the project manager comes in here, all they have to do is make sure that these are the correct line items in the scope of work. Anything that they don't want to have, they'll just, oh, that's a highlighter. They'll just grab it, they'll just delete it out, and your entire scope is done. So we spend the next 2-3 weeks going through. She's spending itemizing things. We're building the automation out. Then we eventually get it put together. And so I'm like, great, you're going to take this onto one of your scope of work calls. And on scope of work call, on your increased scope of work call with the client, wants to add more work, we're going to run it, bring it back to me. So she goes on, has that call. She runs it through the after action checklist automation. Then she runs it into the scope of work automation. And then she has a spreadsheet and gives it to her project manager. And in doing so, we were able to cut this down, this section here, from 10 hours, which is done over the course of 2, 3, 4, 5 days. This was done in less than 2 hours. And more than that, because a lot of this was done by the automation, this was only about 20 minutes of active work, like feeding, reviewing, and whatnot. So because of that, we were able to take this multi-day, multi-person process and cut it down to 2 hours of wait time, like the time it takes for all the automations to work, and 20 minutes of active time. So just by doing this, we were able to free up approximately 10 hours that goes into upgrading scopes and getting them out, and cut it down to 2 hours and 20 minutes, of which only 20 minutes is active working time. The rest of it is just waiting for the automations to run and for things to move around. So we did this. So by doing that, we were able to get this done faster. And that goes into unnecessary friction, which is up here, into our AAC, into scope. Boom. Then we took that. And she said, okay, now I'm like, let's make it even better. So we're going to take this, and not only are we going to do that, we're then going to take this out, this scope template, right? This scope that we created. And what we're going to do is we are going to run it. We're going to plug it directly into your project management software so that when your project manager is done looking at the scope and seeing sure that everything is correct, she just hits a button and it automatically gets moved into, they were using ClickUp, into ClickUp in the correct client project with all the dates and assignments automatically set up at one time, which we didn't actually talk about this, but I've already guessed this is probably like a 1.5 to 2 hour activity per scope of work. So we were able to also eliminate an additional 2.5 hours. If I'm just making that part up, I don't actually know because I didn't ask her, but I'm like, we're already here. We might as well just automate the process to put it inside. So by doing those things, we were able to go from 14 days for work to be going to 3 days. They were able to get their scope of works out faster, down from 14 days, which is 2 weeks, to 3 days. Now, if we think about that from a workflow, from a production perspective, imagine you can onboard a client and you are able to take them from them waiting for 14 days, right? Not even for them waiting, sorry, for your team waiting to begin working on that account from 14 days down to 3 days. If we carry that a little bit further, imagine your typical turnaround is 2 weeks, which means 14 plus 14 is 28 days before your client sees anything. Imagine we can go from 28 days before your client sees something to just 17 days. It's a huge difference from the expectations and desires of a client. They're essentially seeing their worth of their money in half the time, which is tremendous when we think of this from a perspective of client maintenance and how quickly and how happy they are when you deliver things. So that was the second problem we solved. So then after this, she's going on and she's having fun and she's loving it because everything is smoother, faster, whatever. But the issue she was still having is she was still spending a good amount of time. So she came back and she's like, look, I know I said I want to be removed from an account executive, but what I realize is that my relationship with the client is currently what is keeping us afloat. And I'm like, thumbs up. Now on the inside, I'm like, you can actually systemize that and you can actually set it up so that any account manager who meets the basic criteria with a good enough checklist can actually do the same thing. But if you're not there, we're not there yet. So what she asked for is, so what I would rather do is, because my thing is relationships with the clients, how could I bring on a creative director who can take away all of my time in reviewing creative? Because again, she was doing way less time, but now she had more time. She was able to onboard clients, so she was still packed to the gills at 70 hours. She's like, what if I bring on a creative director who can do all of this creative review for me? I'm like, okay. So I asked her, so what stopped you from bringing one on before? She said, well, I did hire, she said she had gone through 2 of them before we started working together over the course of like 9 months. But, and you're going to find a seeking suspicion here, the work that they did wasn't good enough. They were not good enough at catching the adjustments and giving direction per a client. And I'm like, this is an interesting thing for you to say. So I asked her, great, looking at your creative director role, can you outline right now for me in a checklist format every single thing that you do from point A to point B to point C in how you currently do creative director work? You know, giving the direction, finding the strategy, knowing the platform, knowing the specifics, telling the copywriters what to put together, telling the creators how to edit and post produce. She's like, I could not. So I'm like, okay, great. So let's hop onto a call and you're just going to walk me through everything from top to bottom. And let's see if we can pull apart what this process looks like. So we end up going on to 3 or 4 calls over the course of, I think it was like over 2 weeks, where she just like, I'm like, so I'm like, say, what did you do this past week that has to do with creative director role? She's like, oh, I did this and this. I'm like, okay. I looked at my notes. I'm like, okay, we don't have a checklist for this. So walk me through every single step of what you do in order to implement this. So she goes through every single step, bang, 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 bang. I'm like, okay, cool. What else did you do? Oh, I did this thing. I'm like, okay, I already have notes on this one. We don't need to talk about it. And then I did that until I had all of the notes and I had all of her step-by-step checklists. Then I asked her, okay, so now we have these check-by-check lists. What I need you to do is I want you to take this checklist and I want you to actually implement this. The next time you go to do your creative director role, you're going to go through every single one of these steps, because what you're going to find is that what you told me and what you actually do are not the same thing. And we can't build anything to hire someone until you know that this is the actual process. Over the next 2 weeks, she took all those checklists and she done it. And surprisingly, she's like, oh, wow, Kajana, it's crazy. I know I told you what to do, but that's not what I do. And I'm like, wow, how would I know that? It's not like every single CEO/operator does this on the face of the planet. Interesting. So she goes through and adjusts the checklist and she's like, great, here are the actual things that I do in order to do creative direction. And I said, okay, great. Now that we have this. So before we go and hire someone, let's go and look at your existing team members. Look at people inside your company. Is there someone who you believe could take one of or all of these things? So she's looking, thinking. She's like, she's actually, I have one copywriter who has expressed wanting to get more into creative and wants to take on more of a marketing role in the company. And I'm like, great. How about this? What we're going to do, you guys are going to love this, is we are going to make a good enough checklist for that role. And you are going to give it to that copywriter and see if they are able to do it or not. And if they can do it, the question then becomes, is it because they're not skilled? Or if they can't do it, is it because they're not skilled? Or is it because the checklist sucks? So she went and gave it to the copywriter. It actually worked out, and I say this because it doesn't always work out, that copywriter was actually a really good fit for doing these activities. So she was able to, using the good enough checklist, there's like a dozen of them, train up the copywriter over the course of 3 months to become her new creative director. CD. And in doing so, she was able to offload all of her creative direction work to this creative director. So she was able to essentially cut her work time in half because she got rid of all of the creative work. And now, or rather at the time of us ending our work together, until she comes back around because she realizes there's another bottleneck that has to be solved, because there's always a bottleneck, and the question simply is, do you want to solve it and scale the company, or do you want to just drown in whatever the bottleneck's creating? It never stops. It happens forever and ever and ever and ever until you get out of the company or you die. That's just kind of how it goes. Anyways, I digress. So last week, in this time frame, and she was down to 30 hours a week, and she was making all more money and all of these things. Now, with all that being said, is when we're looking at solving bottlenecks in your company, the question is always, where is the constraint? Where is it not working? Where are things hard? Where are things more difficult than they have to be? Because there's always a way to eliminate that bottleneck if we can properly identify where it goes. Is this a friction problem? Is it just too much friction going into this? Is the work bad and we need to make the work systemize how we make the work better? Is that things take too long and we need to systemize how things get done so it can be done in a timely and or desired fashion? And is that your leads are broke and that there has to be more disqualifications in your working process in order to stop them from hopping onto your calendar? It's always the same. It's always the 4 quadrants. It never, ever changes. You talk to anyone who's ever been successful in business, anyone who's ever done more than $3 million, and they'll tell you, yeah, you're simply finding the next bottleneck and solving it. Now, the thing that makes us unique is we specialize in solving bottlenecks. And the way that we typically solve them is we like to put automations in place and AI agents, depending on what the situation is, because that is the highest leverage thing you can do. Imagine, right, if we go back to the example of from 68 minutes down to 15 minutes, right? We can cut that time down just by automating how it is we standardize the review of items. And in the same concept, what was 10 hours here is now 20 minutes of active time and 2 hours of automations running. Like, that is such high leverage, it's insane. Because with that, not that you can do it for infinite amounts, because technically infinite will require infinite resources, and that's a whole nerdy thing we're not going to talk about. But if you are able to decrease your workload in one area of the business from 10 hours to 20 minutes of active work plus 2 hours, approximately 2 hours of waiting, you've just created 5x the opportunity to fill those spots, and in the same time frame as 10 hours, take on and deliver on 5x the clients. Which, if we do simple math on that, if this is $100 and it's still $100, but it only takes you 20 minutes and 2 hours, you can now make $500 because you can do 5x the capacity because you were able to build automations that do work on your behalf. And anyways, that's it. So with that, if you feel like your business is struggling with a bottleneck and you want to change that, down in the link below in the description, or down in the description below is a link. Go ahead, click that, go and schedule a call. We would love to look at your business and figure out what's the actual bottleneck and how can we identify what has to be fixed in order for that bottleneck to be solved. So with that being said, thanks so much for your time, and I will see you next video. Later.